I think there are two fundamental problems with the affirmative case. The first is that they're trying to advocate, or at least critique, a shift to different values, i.e. a shift to willful values from transcendent values, while saying at the same time that that's equivalent to nihilism, which seems to me to mean an absence of values. That's certainly what the authors of the evidence and contention 2 indicate, at which point a reordering of values and a loss of values become two completely different things, which I'm not sure are compatible. The second problem with the case is that transcendent values, which they're arguing are good, or at least should be valued in the status quo, and individual rights, which they are also implicitly valued on the bottom of contention 2, are fundamentally incompatible. Their transcendent values are beyond the immediate, beyond the individual. Individual rights, seems to me, are purely autonomous conceptions which would be contradictory. I'll get to these below and explain them on a line-by-line basis. On observation 2, however, off the first, Lance's first response is there's no indication of how you distribute values or how they trade off. Her first response is there's a specific test, beyond the individual, beyond the immediate, which would feed my contradiction argument. There's no thesis as to why you would value individual rights if they're essentially atomistic. This would be the immediate and the individual, and therefore would certainly be part of the shift to willful values, which they're arguing is bad. Second response is there's no indication of how nihilism fits in all of this. The trade-off between transcendent values and willful values certainly assumes a reprioritization, a reordering. Certainly doesn't assume a complete obliteration of any sort of truth function. My next response is nihilism assumes that we lose truth, i.e. assumes a radical relativism where everything is garnered the same consideration in the value context. Transcendent versus willful values, however, are a matter of good or bad. The truth versus good or bad, I'm not sure, are compatible conceptions as well. She says the individual ordering is inconsistent, but I'm not sure what she's arguing. Our only argument here is that the individual rights that they're evaluating on the bottom of the case would be contradictory with criteria. Like second response, there's a shift to willful values simply reordering. She says willful is bad and our negative values. It's exactly correct. Nihilism doesn't deal with good or bad, it simply deals with true and untrue. Whether we're absolutists and we value values monolithically, or we allow for a free interplay of values, which leads to the sort of nihilistic, the nihilistic indifference, which they're arguing causes the loss of life and causes the loss of individual rights at the bottom of the case. She's not understanding the impacts of her own case. Her next response is case is denying that we have lost the activity to critique. My first response is certainly Glenn's next response would prove that's untrue. Certainly the affirmative critique proves that we still have the capacity to critique. And I'm not simply talking about the two dimensions in the room. The fact that they have access to evidence that argues that advertising is a problem, and the fact that it's such a controversy in present society that the consumer mindset is such a problem would show that we certainly do have the capacity. Otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it in the first place. And that's where I'm now. Glenn's next response is affirmative critique itself proves. She's at a small level in the individuals. However, I'm also talking about the evidence that she uses in the case. I'm also talking about the degree of controversy to which the consumer mindset is being given in present society. Certainly the negative evidence at the very least is arguing that the consumer mindset, the fact that they're arguing about whether advertising affects consumer mindset or not, indicates that it's an important issue in present society. At which point this assertion that it doesn't matter anymore, that we don't have the capacity to examine, is completely false. Our next response is nihilism evidence doesn't assume transcendent willful trade-off. She says doesn't take out contention 2. What does this mean? I'm arguing that the nihilism evidence which assumes that we simply resign from life, we simply resign from any sort of monolithic truth, and simply say, hey, whatever interplay of values occurs, that's fine with us, is fundamentally incompatible with the transcendent willful good-bad distinction, which indicates that there is something good in society. It seems completely incompatible. Our next response, nihilism assumes radical relativism. She says impacts are occurring right now. Hers is a temporal argument, ours is a truth argument. I do not understand how this is a response. We're simply arguing that the truth versus good or bad distinction is not clear. Her off the values are instrumental and pragmatic. She simply says that survival is not part of the quality of life. My first response, I'll be arguing down this below, I'll be arguing survival certainly is essential. Secondly, it's inextricably involved with the quality of life. Quality of life considerations assume an evaluation of the individual, and certainly survival would be prerequisite. She says life effects and contention 2, which seems to be contradictory. If it's implicitly valued in what I see, if they're arguing that it destroys life, it seems to me would be implicit criteria. Life is evaluated through criteria, but I'm not sure what the criteria says. All it says a movement to willful values is bad, but I'm arguing that the sort of individual rights thing, the individual rights conceptions that they're claiming are good, are fundamentally incompatible with nihilism. I'm not sure how this case works. I certainly think that the negative evidence is the only thing in this round that is at all coherent. On contention 2. C subpoint contention 1. Off the top, she argues that values would cause reverse. However, our argument is that survival is not reversible, whereas this trade-off between transcendent and willful values are. In other words, therefore, temporally, you would prefer survival as a criteria because it's not reversible. Additionally, if agency and self-empowerment, which is the thesis behind case, is so important, then life certainly should be valued. I.e., life is the ultimate, the loss of life is the ultimate helplessness, which certainly the authors of their evidence would agree. Next response is certainly survival is inextricably involved with the concept of quality of life. Without one, you can't have the other. She says don't evaluate criteria, but there's no reason why. This is simply an assertion. Please understand advertising doesn't change behavioral tendencies and doesn't alter people's priorities. For her first response, advertising persuades, and you can't deny the attractiveness of certain advertisements. My first response is no analysis. Certainly the tag is better than the car. It simply says you can't deny attractiveness of the ad. Certainly doesn't describe any psychological process. It doesn't describe how people actually incorporate the advertising medium. My response is advertising does work, even if it's mysterious. My first response is absolutely no psychological evaluation. It's simply a card from Business Week arguing that there's a correlation between economic productivity and advertising. Next response is no indication of profound behavior or attitude change, which is certainly what the consumer mindset impact assumes. Her final response is advertising leads to nihilism. First response assumes the internal link of consumerism. It certainly doesn't say advertising causes nihilism. Additionally, there's no causal culpability. There's no indication that advertising is a sufficient condition for a sort of nihilism that consumer mindset causes. Additionally, advertising cannot overcome behavioral tendencies. Alteration of value salience does not equal value manipulation. Hoboken 87. Notice that the shift in salience or relative importance differs markedly from any sort of manipulative distortion of values. First, because it loses value intact while only shifting its priority. Second, because it applies to just one product category. And third, because an ad for some other branded product may work in exactly the opposite direction by arguing for a diametrically opposed increase or decrease in the sales of that very same value, which would also take out the distorted mirror argument down below when they're saying it simply emphasizes that it might reflect, but simply emphasizes aspects over the other. This court argues that simply because you add to a value salience doesn't mean you manipulate values when it's exposed to the greater society. Additionally, advertising is simply part of a larger consumption ethic. It's completely non-unique. Reckoned in 91. This is a world of rational self-interest that John Locke and Adam Smith and other thinkers envisioned several hundred years ago. Our science, technology, economics, and political philosophy provide a convenient backdrop for the narcissism of the modern age. The consumption ethic preaches the value of the moment. Advertising, installment buying, credit card purchases, all promote and validate immediate self-gratification at the expense of the past, future, and others. As long as expanding consumption notions of security remain inextricably intertwined, modern man will continue to devour more and more of nature in less and less time, going further afield from the secure world he desperately seeks. Certainly, advertising isn't any sort of instrumental cause of the consumer mindset which causes nihilism. It's simply a part of other factors, which therefore would become an important object of affirmative critique. Please extend the next three parts to indicate that accuracy, mass underlying problems, focus on ads, create solutions, etc. Her first two responses are assumes awareness, assumes criticism. What does this mean? There are four words that are not explained at all. Our argument is that whenever you focus on ads, you move further away from real solutions to the real problems. You're displacing time that you could be spending on true decision making, and you're spending it on focus on advertising, which is simply a superficial symptom of the problem. She is not coming to grips with the argument. Her next response is this feeds case because ads are the problem, which is not the argument. Our argument is that the focus on the ads, which is what the 1AC and the 2AC are, is what is the problem. It moves us away from solution of problems like nihilism and the growing left-retreat society to result in consumer mindset. These are absolute flips of case, and what her holding responses are assumes awareness and feeds case, which are veiled in some sort of language where that I certainly don't understand. I think it's clear flips of case. Off the last response, we're arguing that advertising accepts human nature or face value. She says advertising is a sort of ability and emphasizes certain values over others. However, this is taken out by the argument up above, indicating that adding to a value salience doesn't indicate value manipulation. On C sub 1 and contention 2, please. 1. We're arguing here that the emphasis on individual rights is patriarchal and that individual rights are anthropocentric. In other words, we're arguing that individual rights are necessarily competitive because they're rooted in the concept of the individual. Whenever I have individual rights, I'm concerned with competition. Do I have my right distributed as a result of governmental intervention against another person? It is a contrary competitive right as opposed to a unitive conception of everyone's well-being, which seems to be perfectly compatible with their idea of the trade-off between transcendent and willful. At which point nihilism becomes a clear double flip. Her response to nihilism takes out, but she's not understanding the analysis. Extend the emphasis on individual rights is patriarchal and competitive. At which point, nihilism would ensure that nihilism would preclude patriarchy, not the other way around. She indicates nihilism leads to tech activity, and nihilism is not bad tech, but those arguments certainly are impacted, and they certainly don't contradict the ethic argument. She indicates ethic presumes value, but we're arguing that ethics is necessary for survival, i.e. this would be an internal impact argument. You don't assume nihilism already occurs, or nihilism is already there, considering they're running on the brink of nihilism now. She indicates nihilism is gradual to extinction, but this is a purely rhetorical card. There's no indication of scenario, and no indication of reasons why. Ethic and patriarchy are concrete concepts.
Okay, let's talk about the text scenario here at the bottom. You're saying that there's no impact, right?
Right.
Okay. But you're arguing anthropocentrism and ethic vital at the bottom, right?
Right.
Okay, so we're assuming some kind of like, well, with advertising, I guess we stop anthropocentrism, or what?
No, this is not a link off advertising. We're arguing that not implicitly, you're explicitly valuing individual rights as good things on the bottom of contention 2, C2 sub 1. You're saying that individual rights would be lost as a result of the advertising consumer mindset nihilism chain that you're claiming the 1AC. I'm arguing these positions for two reasons. The first reason is because they're simply impact flips, right? Individual rights are bad, you say they're good. The second reason, though, is to highlight the contradictions in case. We're saying that if it's true that a move from transcendent values, which are a unitive concept, well, social well-being, as opposed to willful values, which are bad because they're competitive and contrary, this is exactly what patriarchy and ethic are scenarios of. They're scenarios of when people get into a competitive context of you against me, which is the essential, which in the case of patriarchy is the ultimate male domination, aggressiveness.
But what is implied through your argument here would be that advertising would be good because it would stop these things from occurring, right? To the extent that we are arguing that nihilism would destroy individual rights, you're saying, yep, that's great because individual rights.
Well, I guess that would be the ultimate. Right? I guess that would be the ultimate the result of the chain of argument. But I'm not linking it off advertising at all. I'm linking it off individual rights and as an illustration of my above argument.
Okay. On the observation 2, on the value analysis here, you want us to evaluate through survival, right?
Right.
So where are the cards that tell me that survival would be best or survival would be included within the resolution?
this would be analysis that I'm hoping to get into and see.
Okay, so how do we get from like the difference between quality of life to quantity?
Well, I'm saying that that's an arbitrary distinction. I'm saying that quality of life necessarily includes the concept of life. If you're going to talk about things like self-empowerment, etc., those are all things like values, like willful versus transcendent, whatever kind of values, become luxuries if you don't have survival to begin with. Certainly, it's a prerequisite. It's not necessarily, there's no distinction.
How are you impacting off of the life criteria?
This would be the ethic and patriarchy positions on the bottom of the case.
Okay, so if you lose those positions, what? No impacts to life? Is that basically what we're saying here?
Well, yeah, at which point you would just look at the link debate. You would look at cognitive dissonance, you would look at the focus on ads, which are link debates. They're saying, regardless of whatever impact you're weighing, regardless of the criteria, you don't have a warrant because there is no link to advertising to any. Because advertising has no consequence.
On the criticism stuff, you say that criticism precludes understanding. That's the original card, right?
Right.
And then you're going on and you're extending, saying that this focus is bad, right?
Right.
How does that work?
Well, whenever you focus on advertising as a representation of why things are bad in society, when you causally link advertising to certain things that are bad in society, you move us further away from real solutions to those problems. You displace opportunities for real decision-making, for real progress. So if you really think that consumer mindset is a compelling impact, then you would vote against the affirmative because you're simply a focus on advertising, which is a superficial symptom of the problem.
I'm just going to get a copy of this.